He slipped away like it had all been temporary. Like everything we'd shared was just a brief interruption in the real story of his life. Maybe that's what I was to him, a moment, a secret. Something to fill the quiet hours before reality called him back. But to me, it had been everything. I remember the way he used to look at me like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. I thought that meant depth, something unspoken between us. Now I realize it was distance. It was the silence of someone who already knew they weren't staying. When he left, he didn't take anything tangible, just the invisible things that mattered most. My sense of being wanted, my confidence, my ability to believe that love could exist without conditions. It's strange how a person can vanish without slamming a door, without saying goodbye, and still leave such noise behind. Every sound in that house reminded me of him. The way the floorboards creaked near the hallway, the hum of the fridge at midnight, the faint scent of his cologne that clung to my pillow for weeks. It was all there, haunting and tender at the same time. I tried to pretend it didn't matter. Told myself people leave all the time, that heartbreak is just another kind of lesson. But it wasn't that simple. There's a certain kind of silence that comes after someone walks out, a silence that doesn't feel peaceful, but accusing. It asks questions you don't want to answer. What did you do wrong? Why weren't you enough? Why did you let him stay so long if you knew he wasn't yours to keep? I replayed the nights when everything had felt easy, almost holy. When his laughter had filled the air like something rare. When he'd brushed my hair behind my ear and said my name softly, as if it were a secret. Those moments had built a world I believed in, a world where two broken people could fix each other just by holding on tightly enough. But that's the lie I told myself. Because loving someone who doesn't know how to love you back isn't healing. It's self-erasure. After he left, I stopped talking much. I started avoiding mirrors. Avoiding people who knew me too well. I told everyone I was fine, that it ended on good terms, that I didn't need anything from him or anyone, that every lie tasted like metal. Every time I smiled, it felt like a performance I couldn't keep up with. The truth was, I missed him, not just him, but the version of myself that existed when I believed I was loved. Days blurred into nights. My phone stayed silent. My bed felt too big. The world kept moving, as it always does. And I was left behind, still standing in the echo of something that was never meant to last. And maybe that was the hardest part, not the leaving, but realizing that to him, none of it had been permanent. That while I had built my world around him, he had already been planning his escape. A month later, I was back at the diner. The same flickering neon sign hummed outside, throwing pale light across the greasy windows. The air smelled of burnt coffee and old fry oil, a scent that clung to my clothes no matter how many times I washed them. It was the kind of place where the clocks always seemed to move slower, where people came in to escape their own lives for a few minutes, and where I had no choice but to live mine on repeat. I worked a late shift, again midnight to dawn, because that's when no one asked questions. The regulars didn't care about my story. They just wanted refills, pie, and someone to pretend they mattered for a few minutes. I learned to fake smiles that didn't reach my eyes, to listen without really hearing, to nod at strangers' jokes like they were funny. My reflection in the coffee machine looked tired older somehow, harder around the edges. But that was okay. Maybe hardness was what I needed to survive. I used to think I'd never come back here. Back when I was with him, I dreamed of something else, a different life, a new beginning. I told myself I was done with the diner, done with this town, done with being invisible. That life has a cruel way of bringing you full circle. I didn't leave. I just sank back into the same place, the same routine. Except now I carried more silence inside me than ever before. When the rush died down at night, I'd wipe the tables slower than necessary. dragging the cloth across the sticky surfaces just to stay busy. My coworkers chatted about weekend plans and small-town gossip. I stayed quiet, nodding, pretending to care. I didn't. My world had shrunk to the size of the diner this small, humming space where everything smelled like salt and regret. Some nights, I'd catch myself staring out the window, watching headlights drift past on the highway. I'd wonder where they were going, if the people inside those cars felt free or just as lost as me. The thought made me ache. I had no degree to fall back on, no best friend to call after what I'd done, and certainly no man waiting at home. Just silence. And shame. The kind that doesn't shout but whispers, reminding you of every choice that led you here. But even in that emptiness, something quiet began to shift. I didn't know it then, but the loneliness was starting to harden into something else. The pain stopped burning so sharply and began to settle, like embers cooling after a fire. It was still there, but I could breathe again. The diner became more than punishment. It was structure, a place to rebuild. I didn't have much, but I had a job, a paycheck, and a few small moments that were mine. The clatter of dishes, the hiss of the coffee pot, the low hum of the jukebox, they were reminders that I was still here, still standing, even if it wasn't graceful. Sometimes survival doesn't look pretty. It just looks quiet. But over time, that shame changed. It didn't vanish overnight, and it didn't fade gently, it hardened, reshaped itself into something that looked like strength. At first, it was just a kind of stubbornness. I refused to be the girl who fell apart. Every time someone looked at me with pity, it lit a spark inside me, something fierce and defiant. Maybe I couldn't undo what happened, but I could refuse to stay broken. That thought became my anchor. I started small, because small was all I could handle. I picked up extra shifts, saved every crumpled bill and every coin I could find. The money wasn't much, but I made it stretch. Eventually, I applied to a few community college classes, nothing fancy, just the basics. I paid for them myself, one paycheck at a time. No loans, no shortcuts, no one's name on the tuition but mine. There was something sacred in that, something that felt like taking back control. Every textbook, every late-night study session was a quiet rebellion against the version of me who thought she couldn't survive without someone else. It wasn't easy. There were nights when exhaustion hit so hard I'd fall asleep at the kitchen table, my notes sticking to my cheek. There were mornings when the alarm would go off after 3 hours of sleep, and I'd drag myself to the diner, numb and half awake. But beneath the fatigue, there was pride. I was doing it. Slowly, painfully, but honestly. I wasn't waiting for rescue anymore. I knew I needed help too. The kind that went deeper than hard work. So I found a therapist, a kind woman who saw through my practiced calm. Her office smelled like lavender and paper, and she had this soft way of speaking that made silence feel safe. I couldn't afford her full rate, but she let me pay what I could, when I could. Sometimes I'd bring her small envelopes with a few bills inside, embarrassed by how little they held, but she never made me feel less than. "You're showing up," she'd say. "That matters." And I believed her. Eventually, at first, talking was impossible. The words caught in my throat, heavy and tangled. I didn't know how to explain the kind of pain that doesn't bruise your skin, but still leaves marks. But week after week, I kept showing up. I talked about him, about her, about the pieces of myself I'd lost and the guilt I still carried. The more I spoke, the lighter I became, not empty, but clearer, like I was finally understanding my own story instead of just reliving it. Then came writing. I started scribbling in old notebooks, sentences that made no sense, fragments of thoughts that felt too raw to say out loud. But soon, writing became my second voice. On paper, I didn't stutter. I didn't apologize. I didn't hide. It was messy, imperfect, and completely mine. For the first time in a long time, I could see the faint outline of someone I was beginning to recognize again. Not a victim, not a mistake, but a woman learning how to start over. Talking turned into writing, and writing slowly turned into sharing. At first, it was private pages tucked away in an old notebook, words that no one else would ever see. But after a while, keeping it all inside felt too much like the silence I had been living in for years. So I began posting small pieces online, fragments of thoughts and feelings I didn't know how to say out loud. Little things like, healing isn't pretty, or some people leave, and that's the lesson. I didn't use my real name. I didn't have to. It was enough that someone, somewhere, might read them and understand. The first time someone commented, it startled me. They said my words made them cry, that they'd felt the same way once, and they thought they were alone. I remember staring at the screen for a long time, not knowing what to type back. That one message felt like a door opening, a reminder that my pain wasn't unique, but it could still mean something. I wasn't writing to be seen anymore. I was writing to connect, to reach through the fog and say, me too. Soon, people started following my posts. Just a few at first, then more. I didn't know their faces or their names, but somehow I cared for them. They shared their own stories, their heartbreaks and recoveries, their quiet nights of doubt. I realized we were all just trying to make sense of our lives, all trying to forgive ourselves for the things we stayed through or walked away from. That connection became a kind of mirror. In their messages, I saw pieces of myself reflected back, and for the first time, I didn't hate what I saw. One evening after work, I sat on my bed with my laptop open and thought about how far I'd come. I wasn't fixed. I still had bad days, nights when I felt the old ache rise again. But there was something different in how I carried it now. I didn't crumble under it. I held it, studied it, and let it remind me of how strong I had become. I stopped calling myself broken. I stopped apologizing for surviving in the only ways I knew how. I began to see my reflection clearly again, not as the woman he left, not as the friend who made mistakes, but as someone who had learned to stand alone. There was power in that clarity. I started walking taller, dressing differently, even laughing without guilt. The world hadn't changed, but I had. I found beauty in small things again, the way sunlight hit the counter at the diner, the smell of rain on concrete, the rhythm of my own footsteps when I walked home alone. Each day became a quiet victory. Each word I wrote was a small act of rebellion against the girl who used to keep silent. I wasn't chasing closure anymore. I wasn't waiting for forgiveness or a happy ending. I was living, really living, and that was more healing than any apology could ever be. I stopped thinking of Calvin as a wound. That realization didn't come in one clean moment. It came slowly, like sunlight sneaking through closed blinds. For a long time, his name still made my stomach twist, but over time, even that faded. He became just a man, no longer the storm I blamed for my wreckage. I started to see him as he truly was, flawed, lonely, and desperate to be seen. Maybe he did care for me, in his own fractured way, but love from a broken place is rarely gentle. It's hungry, uncertain, always taking more than it gives. Looking back, I can admit that we were both searching for the same thing: rescue. He wanted to be saved from himself, from the emptiness he carried. And I wanted to be saved from mine. We mistook each other's desperation for love, and that mistake almost ruined us both. There were moments when I thought I could heal him, if I just stayed long enough, loved hard enough. But love can't survive as a project. It has to be a partnership. We didn't know how to do that. We were both too lost to build something that could last. For a while, I blamed him for everything, for the guilt, the distance, the silence that followed. But somewhere between the sleepless nights and the pages I filled with truth, I realized he wasn't the only one at fault. I had stayed when I should have walked away. I had chosen silence over honesty. I had betrayed a friend who would have fought for me through anything. That betrayal sat inside me like a stone, heavy and unmoving. It wasn't something I could undo, but I could carry it with awareness, with the intention to never let it happen again. Forgiving him was easier than forgiving myself. It's strange how that works. I told myself he was human, that people make mistakes, that love can twist even the best of us into something unrecognizable. But when it came to me, I had no mercy. I replayed every choice, every lie, every chance I had to stop what was coming. For months, I punished myself with memories, as if reliving them could change their ending. It didn't. It only made me smaller. Eventually, I understood that carrying guilt wasn't the same as growing from it. I could honor the pain without letting it define me. I could remember what it cost without letting it cage me. So I started to let go not of the lessons, but of the self-loathing. I began to see the story for what it truly was. Two people colliding in the dark, trying to find light in each other, and failing. And that's okay. Not every love story is meant to be a forever. Some are meant to break us open so we can finally see ourselves clearly. I don't think of him much anymore. Sometimes a song, a scent, or a late-night silence will bring him back for a second. But then it passes. What stays with me now isn't him, but the woman I became after him. The one who stopped waiting to be chosen, who learned that saving herself was the only kind of rescue that lasts.